Clara Beaumont, at 78, felt the familiar stiffness in her fingers more acutely than the weight of the antique signet ring she wore. The ring, a cherished heirloom from her late husband Edward, was a symbol of the Beaumont legacy, a legacy built not on steel or vineyards, but on words and stories, on the hallowed halls of Beaumont and Sons Publishing. For 5 decades, Edward had been a titan in the literary world, a visionary publisher, and the quiet force behind countless beloved authors. 5 years after his passing, the sprawling Beaumont Manor, with its vast private library and historic printing presses, where tonight's annual literary gala was being held, felt less like a monument to his passion and more like a stage for her family's increasingly transparent ambitions. She wasn't vain, but for the most prestigious event on the publishing calendar, Clara had dressed with meticulous care. A deep sapphire blue velvet gown chosen to complement her silver hair flowed elegantly as she moved through the hushed corridors of the manor. She'd styled her hair herself, a practiced hand smoothing every strand. A touch of Edward's favorite leather-bound book scent, a custom fragrance he'd commissioned, completed her ensemble. "You look magnificent, Clara," she murmured to her reflection in an old, ornate gilt mirror, a bittersweet echo of Edward's voice. She could almost feel his arm around her, his silent approval, the warmth of his presence. The literary gala was a glittering affair, held in the grand ballroom of the manor, beneath a soaring, frescoed ceiling that depicted scenes from classic literature. Hundreds of guests, a who's who of authors, literary agents, critics, and the city's cultural elite, mingled amidst towering bookshelves and flickering candlelight. The soft murmur of conversation, punctuated by the clinking of crystal glasses and the sophisticated strains of a classical string quartet, filled the air. Her granddaughter, Olivia, the guest of honor tonight for her recent success in launching the firm's new digital imprint, glowed with youthful energy. Her fiancé, Leo, a rising literary agent, by her side, his charming demeanor a stark contrast to the often-staid publishing world. Clara's son, Julian, now the CEO of Beaumont and Sons, moved through the crowd with an air of practiced authority, his smile wide and his handshake firm, a copy of the firm's latest bestseller always in hand. His wife, Serena, impeccably dressed in the latest designer fashion and perpetually poised, glided beside him, her eyes constantly scanning the room, ensuring every detail was perfect, every interaction strategically managed for maximum social and business impact. For a fleeting moment, as she watched Olivia animatedly discuss the future of publishing with a renowned author, Clara felt a flicker of genuine pride, a warmth spreading through her chest. Perhaps, despite the subtle undercurrents she so often felt, this would truly be a night to celebrate Edward's enduring vision and the future of their beloved publishing house. The illusion shattered at the main reception table, where guests were directed to sign the guest book and collect their personalized event programs. A young intern, barely out of literature school, her smile bright and eager, handed Clara a beautifully printed program and a small, polished brass name tag, meant to be pinned to a lapel. Clara glanced down, expecting to see Clara Beaumont, founder's widow. Instead, in elegant engraved script, the name tag read, "Clara Beaumont, the firm's deepest pockets. Open for business." Her hand froze, the cool metal searing into her consciousness. A wave of heat rushed to her face, a familiar flush of humiliation. Surely this was a mistake. "Is something wrong, Mrs. Beaumont?" the intern asked, her eyes widening slightly as she noticed Clara's rigid posture. Clara forced a strained smile. "There seems to be a mix-up with my name tag," she managed, her voice barely a whisper, the words catching in her throat. The young woman leaned closer, her gaze falling on the offending inscription. "Oh, my goodness, I am so terribly sorry. Let me see if there's another one." "No, it's quite all right," Clara interjected quickly, not wanting to cause a scene at such a public event, especially not one honoring Olivia. "I'll speak with my family about it." She clutched the name tag, its words mocking her, a bitter taste rising in her mouth, and made her way into the bustling ballroom. Had Olivia approved this? Julian, Serena? Who on earth thought this was appropriate, let alone amusing? The question gnawed at her, a bitter acid burning in her stomach. Throughout the initial reception, Clara tried to appear composed, engaging in polite conversation with fellow literary figures and old family friends who, thankfully, either didn't notice the inscription or were too discreet to mention it. Then, a hushed whisper drifted from a cluster of guests near a towering display of rare first editions. "Did you see Clara's name tag?" A woman giggled, stifling a laugh behind her hand. Serena said they thought it would be hilarious. Apparently, she's their personal ATM for the firm's special projects. Clara's blood ran cold. She moved away swiftly, her hands trembling, the brass name tag feeling like a brand against her skin, a mark of shame. Just then, Julian spotted her. "Mother!" he called, his voice booming across the spacious ballroom, drawing attention. "Come meet the Harrington family." Mr. Harrington was one of Father's earliest authors. Clara approached reluctantly, her heart sinking, a familiar dread coiling in her gut. Mr. Harrington, a distinguished gentleman with a booming laugh, looked vaguely familiar, a figure from Edward's early, struggling days. "Mother, this is Mr. and Mrs. Harrington," Julian announced, then added with a chuckle that grated on Clara's nerves, a sound devoid of genuine warmth. "Mother, our beloved, ever generous, silent partner, Mrs. Harrington's polite smile faltered as her eyes darted to Clara's name tag. Mr. Harrington looked distinctly uncomfortable, his jovial expression replaced by a frown of concern. "Clara Beaumont," Clara stated, extending her hand firmly. Ignoring Julian's crude remark, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Edward's widow. The firm's co-founder. Of course, Mrs. Beaumont," Mr. Harrington said kindly, his voice warm, a genuine respect in his tone. "Edward spoke of you often. He always said you were the true editor, the one with the keenest eye for a story. The heart of the publishing house." The conversation continued, but Clara barely registered it. Her mind reeled with Julian's casual cruelty, his blatant disregard for her dignity, and her actual role in the firm's history. When the Harringtons moved on, Clara pulled Julian aside, her voice low and tight with suppressed anger, a dangerous tremor beneath the surface. "What is the meaning of this, Julian?" she demanded, gesturing to the name tag, the brass glinting under the ballroom lights. Julian laughed, a dismissive, airy sound that grated on her nerves. "Oh, Mother, don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you're the one with the deepest pockets since Father left you everything. It's a tribute to your generosity, to your enduring support for Beaumont and Sons. It's humiliating," Clara said quietly, her eyes burning, a hot, stinging sensation behind them. "It's disrespectful. It reduces my entire life's work and Edward's legacy to mere financial transactions." "Oh, please," he rolled his eyes, a gesture she found increasingly irritating, a mirror of his mother's worst traits. "Lighten up, Mother. It's a celebration. Everyone's having a good time. Don't be such a spoilsport." Before she could respond, Serena appeared, elegant in a shimmering silk gown, her smile a little too wide, a little too practiced. "There you are, Clara. Has Julian been introducing you around? We want everyone to know who's responsible for this absolutely gorgeous literary gala. Olivia's new imprint is simply flying off the shelves, isn't it?" She winked, and both Julian and Serena laughed, a sound that echoed hollowly in Clara's ears, devoid of genuine mirth. Clara excused herself, needing a moment of solitude, a breath of fresh, unperfumed air. She made her way to a quiet, dimly lit corner of the manor, near an old, unused printing press, splashing cold spring water on her flushed face from a small stone basin in a forgotten washroom. As she dabbed her eyes with a linen handkerchief, the heavy oak door to Edward's private study creaked open, and an older gentleman in a perfectly tailored suit entered, then backed out apologetically. Miss Beaumont? Clara? He called tentatively from outside, his voice quiet, respectful. It's Mr. Thorne, Edward's attorney. Might I have a word? Clara composed herself and stepped out. Mr. Thorne, a man of impeccable discretion and quiet integrity, had handled all of Edward's legal affairs for decades. She couldn't help but notice his gaze flickered vaguely toward her engraved name tag and the general buzz of conversations, the whispers that seemed to follow her. Apparently, it's just a joke. Mr. Thorne, Clara sighed, a bitter, self-deprecating laugh escaping her lips. Mr. Thorne's expression darkened, a profound sadness in his eyes. It's not funny, Clara. And Edward would have been furious. He valued your dignity, your intellect, above all else. He hesitated, then lowered his voice, his gaze serious, almost conspiratorial. There's something you should know. Something Edward insisted I not tell you unless it became absolutely necessary. A final, crucial provision. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew a thick, sealed envelope, its parchment yellowed with age, bearing Edward's distinctive seal. This is a codicil to Edward's will. He added it shortly before he passed. He foresaw certain possibilities regarding the firm and your role. Clara opened it with trembling fingers. The legal language was complex, written in precise, formal English. But the meaning was chillingly clear. Any direct descendant who publicly humiliates Clara Beaumont, or attempts to control her finances against her will, or tries to force her from Beaumont Manor, or attempts to seize control of Beaumont and Sons Publishing without her explicit written consent, would be disinherited from their share of Edward's fortune. A fortune, Clara now realized with a gasp, much, much larger than even she had fully grasped, tied intrinsically to the success and ownership of the very publishing house they now managed. She looked up at Mr. Thorne, stunned, the words swirling in her mind. Why wouldn't he tell me this, Mr. Thorne? He hoped it would never be needed, Mrs. Beaumont, Mr. Thorne said quietly, his voice filled with a gentle understanding. He wanted them to treat you right because they loved you, Clara, because they respected your wisdom and your heart, not because they feared losing their inheritance. He believed in the inherent goodness of his children, even as he prepared for their potential failings. Clara glanced back toward the bustling ballroom, where Julian and Serena laughed, oblivious, celebrating, unaware that their behavior had just cost them millions, perhaps even the control of Beaumont and Sons itself. What do you want to do, Clara? Mr. Thorne asked, his voice gentle, offering her the reins of power. Clara carefully folded the document, the crisp, aged parchment feeling heavy in her hands, a profound weight of responsibility and newfound strength. She handed it back to him. Nothing, she said, her voice firm, a new resolve hardening her gaze, a quiet fire igniting in her eyes. Not yet. I need to see just how far they'll go. I need to see their true colors, their true story. As she returned to the gala, the engraved brass name tag, the firm's deepest pockets, open for business, felt heavier against her chest. But now, instead of shame, Clara felt something different stirring inside her. A cold, quiet determination. A resolve to finally see her family for who they truly were, to understand the depth of their greed, and to protect Edward's true legacy, the integrity of Beaumont and Sons, and the power of words. The morning after the literary gala, Clara sat alone at her antique writing desk in Edward's sprawling study, the offending brass name tag from the previous night resting beside her untouched cup of Darjeeling. Clara Beaumont. The firm's deepest pockets. Open for business. She traced the elegant engraving with a trembling finger, the words a bitter mockery of her true feelings, of her profound grief. She remembered how Edward would have reacted. His quiet fury, though rarely unleashed, was a formidable force when someone disrespected those he held dear, especially his beloved Clara, his intellectual equal and partner. They've changed, she whispered to the rows of leather-bound books, as if Edward could hear her. Or perhaps they were always this way. And I, in my grief, simply chose not to see it, blinded by my love for them and my devotion to your legacy. She rose, the silk of her robe rustling softly, and moved to the grand library, drawn by an invisible pull to the large oil portrait of Edward above the carved mahogany fireplace. It had been painted 20 years ago, a vibrant depiction of him in his prime, surrounded by towering stacks of manuscripts. He looked so alive, so full of purpose, so connected to the world of words. When exactly had things changed? The question echoed in the quiet grandeur of Beaumont Manor. Perhaps it had been gradual, so subtle she hadn't noticed the slow erosion of respect, until it had become a gaping chasm. The first clear memory surfaced, sharp and painful, just a year after Edward's funeral. Julian and Serena had invited her to a private lunch at an exclusive members-only club downtown. An unusual gesture, even then, as they rarely sought her company outside of formal family or firm obligations. They'd been unusually attentive, asking about her well-being, reminiscing about Edward with what seemed like genuine warmth, even shedding a few well-placed tears. Then, over a delicate lemon tart, they'd broached the real purpose of the gathering. "Mother," Julian had begun, refilling her water glass with a practiced ease, his voice smooth and persuasive. "Serena and I have been thinking about a major upgrade for the firm's digital infrastructure. New servers, advanced software for manuscript submission, a complete overhaul of our online presence. Nothing extravagant, just ensuring Beaumont and Sons remains at the cutting edge of publishing." "That sounds vital, Julian," Clara had replied, genuinely pleased by the thought of the firm's modernization, completely oblivious to the trap being laid. Edward always emphasized the importance of embracing new technologies. "The thing is," Serena continued smoothly, her voice a soft purr, her eyes gleaming with a calculating light, "with the current market shifts and the rising costs of maintaining the manor, we're a bit stretched right now. The bank loans for the recent expansion were substantial." Clara remembered the pause, the expectant, almost hungry looks in their eyes, the subtle shift in their posture. "Are you asking me for money?" she'd asked, a flicker of unease stirring within her, a premonition of what was to come. "Not asking, Mother." Julian had quickly interjected, a dismissive wave of his hand. "It's just that Father left you quite comfortable, and we thought perhaps you'd want to help out the firm. For Edward's legacy, of course. To truly honor his vision for a modern publishing house." Clara, still reeling from her grief and desperate to honor Edward's memory and ensure the firm's prosperity, had written them a check for $700,000 that very afternoon. Looking back, that had been the insidious beginning. Small requests for firm improvements became larger ones. A new digital infrastructure became a complete renovation of Julian and Serena's private offices within the firm's headquarters. Funding for technological upgrades became lavish marketing campaigns and international travel expenses for Julian and Serena to scout new literary talent in exclusive, exotic locales. Each time, the requests were cloaked in the language of legacy, of honoring Edward's vision, but the underlying current of self-interest grew increasingly blatant, increasingly audacious. She walked to Edward's meticulously organized filing cabinets in his study, their polished wood gleaming in the morning light. She pulled out a heavy, leather-bound ledger, Edward's meticulous records of the firm's finances and his personal investments. Sitting on the plush, antique rug, she began sorting through bank statements and meticulously kept records of her personal transfers to Beaumont and Sons. The evidence of her financial support for Julian and Serena's increasingly extravagant projects and lifestyle was overwhelming. Over 5 years, she had personally contributed nearly $5 million to Beaumont and Sons Publishing, far beyond her annual pledge donation to the firm. The sheer sum made her gasp, a cold knot forming in her stomach, a bitter taste rising in her throat. The antique telephone on the desk, a direct line to the firm's main office, rang, startling her. It was Serena. "Clara, are you at the manor? I've been calling your mobile." Clara hadn't even noticed her mobile was still in her evening purse. "Yes, I am." Is everything all right, Serena? Everything's perfectly fine. Julian and I just wanted to thank you for everything last night. Wasn't the literary gala magnificent? Olivia's new digital imprint was a triumph, wasn't it? Yes, it was lovely, Clara said, her voice flat, devoid of genuine warmth. Olivia and Leo are so grateful for your generosity. They couldn't have had such a wonderful launch without your unwavering support. Clara closed her eyes, remembering the $1 million transfer she'd made just last month to cover the unexpected costs of the digital imprint's initial marketing push. I was happy to help. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling, Serena continued, her voice taking on that syrupy, manipulative quality Clara had come to recognize, a tone that always preceded a new demand, a new financial drain. Leo's family was supposed to fund Olivia's dream of acquiring a small, prestigious literary agency in London, a satellite office for the firm, but his father's business has had some unforeseen setbacks, and they've had to pull out. Olivia is just devastated. The agency is so vital for the firm's international reach, for its expansion into the global market. Clara could hear what was coming next, the familiar, insidious drumbeat of expectation. We were wondering if you might be able to step in, Mother. It's a substantial commitment, of course. But think of the impact, Clara. The legacy for Edward, a true global presence for Beaumont and Sons. I'll think about it, Serena, Clara said, surprising both herself and Serena with her non-committal response. It was a small victory, a tiny crack in the dam, but a victory nonetheless. There was a pause, a beat of unexpected silence on Serena's end. Oh. Well, the agency needs to secure its acquisition soon, to capitalize on the upcoming Frankfurt Book Fair. Time is of the essence, Mother. I understand. I'll let you know tomorrow. After hanging up, Clara returned to her financial ledger. Edward had always warned her about Julian's relationship with money. He sees it as a means to an end, my dear, he'd told her once, his brow furrowed with concern, his gaze fixed on the distant bookshelves. Not a tool for fostering creativity, for nurturing authors, but for acquisition, for power. Money without true passion for literature just creates empty bestsellers, beautiful on the outside but hollow within. Clara hadn't fully understood then, or perhaps she hadn't wanted to understand, blinded by her love for her son. A soft knock at the study door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Ethan, her grandson, Olivia's younger brother, shifting nervously on the porch. He was a quiet, thoughtful young man, a budding literary scholar, with a deep, almost spiritual connection to the classics and the art of storytelling, much like Edward. She quickly gathered up the scattered financial papers and stashed them back in the ledger before opening the door. "Grandma," he said, stepping forward to hug her, his embrace warm and genuine. At 26, he was tall, like his grandfather, with the same kind eyes that seemed to see the world with a deeper understanding, a quiet wisdom. "Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you." "I'm fine, sweetheart, just a bit tired after last night." "Come in." He followed her to the kitchen, where she put on the kettle for fresh herbal tea, the comforting aroma filling the air. Ethan had always been different from the rest of them. More introspective, less fixated on the glamour of the publishing world. More concerned with its true essence, its connection to the profound power of words. "I wanted to apologize for last night," he said, sitting at the kitchen table, his gaze earnest, his hands clasped before him. The name tag, the way everyone was talking, it wasn't right. It was disrespectful. To you, and to Grandpère Edward's true spirit. Clara felt a lump form in her throat, a wave of emotion washing over her. "You noticed, Ethan?" "Of course I noticed, Grandma. So did a lot of people who actually respect you, who understand what you and Grandpère built here, the real foundation of Beaumont and Sons." He looked down, embarrassed, a flush rising on his cheeks. "I should have said something. I should have stood up for you." Clara patted his hand, her touch gentle. It's not your responsibility to correct your parents, Ethan, but it is my responsibility to stand up for what's right. For myself, and for Edward's true legacy. He looked at her directly, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity, a deep understanding. Dad and Mom, they've changed since Grandpère Edward died. Or maybe I just didn't see it before. All they talk about is the firm's expansion, its market value. Your funding. Specifically, what do you mean, Ethan? Clara asked, a cold dread beginning to creep into her stomach. A sense of foreboding she couldn't shake. Ethan hesitated, his gaze meeting hers, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. Last week, I overheard them discussing the firm's long-term ownership. Dad said something about how the current structure is inefficient and how they could streamline it by having you transfer a larger portion of your personal assets, and even your direct ownership shares, directly to the firm's main trust, under their sole management. They said it was for the future of Beaumont and Sons, to ensure its uninterrupted prosperity and to protect it from unforeseen circumstances. They meant you, Grandma. They even talked about converting the manor into a corporate retreat. The kettle whistled, giving Clara a moment to absorb this chilling information. Her entire fortune, her direct ownership of the firm, her very connection to Edward's life work, her home. As she poured the hot water over the tea bags, her hands trembled, the ceramic clinking against the saucer. She thought about Mr. Thorne and the codicil to Edward's will. She thought about the engraved name tag, the constant demands for money, and now this audacious plan to seize complete control of her entire fortune, her home, her life, cloaked in the guise of efficiency and legacy for Edward's beloved publishing house. Grandma? Ethan's voice brought her back to the present, his hand gently touching her arm. Are you sure you're okay? Clara set the teapot on the table and sat down across from him, her gaze fixed on his kind, earnest face. I'm better than okay, Ethan. I think I'm finally seeing things clearly for the first time in years. The true story, as Edward would say, is finally revealing itself. What do you mean, Grandma? Clara smiled, making a decision, a quiet resolve settling deep within her. Just that. It's time for some changes around here. Real changes. Changes that will truly honor Edward's vision, not just exploit it. As they sipped their tea, Clara found herself studying her grandson's face, wondering if he was truly different from his parents, or if the seeds of entitlement were merely dormant, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. For the first time since Edward died, Clara felt a cold clarity replace her grief and loneliness. She wouldn't be making any hasty decisions, but she would be watching and waiting to see who in her family truly deserved the legacy Edward had left. A legacy not just of wealth, but of integrity, passion, and respect for the power of words. 3 days after the literary gala, Julian and Serena organized a private author appreciation luncheon at the firm's exclusive members-only dining room, a space usually reserved for the most celebrated literary figures and high-profile book launches. Clara deliberated whether to attend. Part of her wanted to retreat, to nurse her wounds in the quiet solitude of Beaumont Manor, far from their manipulative schemes. But a stronger, newer impulse, a spark of the old Clara Edward had so admired, won out. Curiosity, a cold, analytical curiosity, compelled her. She wanted to see if the engraved name tag incident had been an anomaly, a momentary lapse in judgment, or part of a deeper, more insidious pattern of entitlement. She arrived at Beaumont and Sons' elegant dining room, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit that Edward had always said made her look formidable. As she entered, she noticed several guests from the literary gala, including Olivia and her fiancé, Leo Ethan, and various prominent authors, literary agents, and longtime patrons. "Mother, over here!" Julian called, waving her toward the long, antique mahogany table at the center of the room. Serena, resplendent in a custom-made silk gown that probably cost more than most people's annual book budget, gave her an air kiss, her smile a little too wide, a little too practiced. "Clara!" "You look remarkably composed," she said, her tone suggesting mild surprise, as if Clara's usual demeanor was something to be endured. "We saved you a seat right here." Clara settled into the chair, noting with a prickle of annoyance that she'd been placed next to a minor author whom she barely knew, rather than near her grandchildren or Mr. Thorne. The luncheon proceeded pleasantly enough, a superficial veneer of civility masking the underlying tension Clara now acutely felt. Julian delivered a polished speech about Beaumont and Son's successes, its rich history, and its ambitious future plans, emphasizing the need for continued investment and support from their esteemed partners. Then Serena clinked her crystal glass for attention, the sound echoing a little too loudly in the elegant room. "We want to thank everyone for coming today, and for your unwavering belief in Beaumont and Sons Publishing," she began, her voice dripping with practiced warmth. "And of course, a special thank you to our most dedicated benefactor, Clara Beaumont, whose personal contributions have been truly instrumental in our recent successes and ambitious future." All eyes turned to Clara, a spotlight of uncomfortable, expectant attention. "In fact," Serena continued, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, a predatory glint in their depths, "we have an exciting announcement. Thanks to Mother's incredible foresight and generosity, Olivia's dream of acquiring a small, prestigious literary agency in London, a satellite office for the firm, will be finalized next month, just in time for the Frankfurt Book Fair." There was a smattering of polite applause, a few murmurs of admiration for the philanthropic spirit and the bold vision. Clara sat frozen, her water glass halfway to her lips. She had made no such commitment. Her "I'll think about it" had been a conscious, deliberate attempt to create distance, not an affirmation. "Mother?" Julian prompted, his voice laced with a subtle warning, when Clara didn't immediately acknowledge the announcement. "Aren't you going to say something?" Clara carefully, deliberately, set her glass down, the crystal clinking softly against the linen. "This is the first I'm hearing of it," she said, keeping her voice level, a calm that belied the storm brewing inside her. An awkward silence fell over the table, thick and palpable. Olivia looked confused, then deeply embarrassed, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink. Leo stared intently at his plate, as if the intricate pattern of the china held the secrets of the universe. "Well, we discussed it yesterday, Clara," Serena said, with a brittle, forced laugh, attempting to brush off the discomfort. "Remember? You said you'd think about it, and we took that as a positive indication, given the urgency of securing the London agency before our competitors." "Yes, I did say that," Clara replied, her gaze steady, meeting Serena's. "And I'm still thinking. A substantial commitment like this requires careful consideration and my explicit consent." Julian leaned over, speaking in a stage whisper clearly meant to be heard by everyone at the table. "Mother, don't make a scene. We've already signed the preliminary acquisition agreement based on your implied commitment." Clara felt something inside her snap, a thread of patience that had been stretched too far for too long. "I don't recall agreeing to fund an entire London literary agency," she said, her voice clear and resonant, loud enough for everyone to hear. "In fact, I believe Leo's family was originally planning to cover this expense." Leo's father, a prominent London publisher, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face reddening. "There were some unforeseen market corrections," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I understand," Clara said kindly, her tone softening slightly towards Leo's parents, who seemed genuinely distressed. "These things happen, but I think it's inappropriate to publicly volunteer someone else's money without their explicit agreement, don't you?" The table fell silent again. This time a stunned, absolute quiet. Serena's face flushed a deep, angry red, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. "Perhaps the firm might consider a more modest launch for the London agency," Clara suggested, her voice still calm, but with an edge of steel. "One within its current means, or with funding secured through transparent official channels." "Its means?" Serena hissed, her voice rising, a vein throbbing faintly in her temple. What about your means, Clara? Everyone knows Edward left you more than comfortable. This is for his legacy, for the global presence of Beaumont and Sons. Something in her tone, the sheer entitlement, the thinly veiled resentment, the complete lack of respect for Clara as an individual, as Edward's partner, made Clara's decision crystal clear. My personal assets are not up for public discussion, she said firmly, her gaze unwavering, and neither are my spending choices. Especially not when they are being unilaterally announced as a done deal, and tied to my late husband's name in such a manipulative fashion. Julian grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in painfully, a desperate plea in his eyes. Mother, stop it. You're embarrassing us. This is damaging the firm's reputation with our international partners. Clara pulled her arm away, her movement sharp and decisive. No, Julian, you've embarrassed yourselves. And you are damaging Edward's true legacy, which was built on integrity, not on financial coercion. She stood up, smoothing her suit jacket, a quiet dignity in her posture. Olivia, Leo, I wish you both every success with the agency. I'd be happy to discuss a reasonable personal contribution to its initial phase, but I'll discuss that with you privately, at my discretion, through proper channels. As she turned to leave, Ethan stood up as well, his chair scraping against the polished floor. I'll walk you out, Grandma. In the opulent, echoing main hall of the publishing house, away from the prying eyes and hushed whispers of the private dining room, Clara finally let her composure slip. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her car keys, the weight of the past few minutes pressing down on her, a profound sense of betrayal washing over her. Are you okay to drive, Grandma? Ethan asked gently, his hand resting lightly on her arm, a comforting, steadying presence. Clara nodded, taking a deep, shaky breath. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a bit shaken. The sheer audacity. You should be proud of yourself, Grandma, Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. That took incredible courage. Everyone saw it. The true literary figures, the ones who understand integrity. Clara looked at her grandson, really looked at him. In that moment, he reminded her so much of Edward. The quiet strength, the unwavering moral compass, the deep connection to the power of words. It made her heart ache with a familiar longing, but also with a new sense of hope. Would you like to come over for dinner tonight, Ethan? She asked impulsively, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. Just us. A simple meal. Ethan smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his kind eyes. I'd like that, Grandma. Very much. I have something important to tell you, too. Later that evening, as they sat in Clara's spacious, yet suddenly cozy, kitchen, sharing a simple meal of roasted chicken and fresh vegetables, Clara found herself confiding in Ethan about his parents' behavior over the past 5 years. The constant financial demands, the gradual erosion of respect, the feeling of being seen as nothing more than a source of funds for their ambitions, their insatiable desire for prestige in the publishing world. I'm not surprised, Grandma, Ethan said sadly, pushing a piece of potato around his plate. I've watched it happening. After Grandpère Edward died, it was like they saw you as… I don't know. The firm's personal ATM? A bottomless well for their projects? The firm's personal ATM, Clara supplied, a wry smile touching her lips, though her eyes were filled with a deep sadness. Yes, that's exactly it. A convenient source of capital, he nodded. And it's getting worse. Last week I overheard them talking about the firm's long-term ownership again, about Grandpère Ray's will. What did they say, Ethan? Clara asked, a cold dread beginning to creep into her stomach, a sense of foreboding she couldn't shake. Ethan hesitated, his gaze meeting hers, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. They were discussing how to streamline the firm's assets by having you transfer a larger portion of your personal assets and even your direct ownership shares directly to the firm's main trust under their sole management. They said it was for the future of Beaumont and Sons, to ensure its uninterrupted prosperity and to protect it from unforeseen circumstances. They meant you, Grandma. They even talked about converting the manor into a corporate retreat, selling off some of Edward's first editions. The kettle whistled, giving Clara a moment to absorb this chilling information. Her entire fortune, her direct ownership of the firm, her very connection to Edward's life work, her home, filled with decades of memories. As she poured the hot water over the tea bags, her hands trembled, the ceramic clinking against the saucer. She thought about Mr. Thorne and the codicil to Edward's will. She thought about the engraved name tag, the constant demands for money, and now this audacious plan to seize complete control of her entire fortune, her home, her life, cloaked in the guise of efficiency and legacy for Edward's beloved publishing house. Grandma? Ethan's voice brought her back to the present, his hand gently touching her arm. Are you sure you're okay? Clara set the teapot on the table and sat down across from him, her gaze fixed on his kind, earnest face. I'm better than okay, Ethan. I think I'm finally seeing things clearly for the first time in years. The true story, as Edward would say, is finally revealing itself. What do you mean, Grandma? Clara smiled, making a decision, a quiet resolve settling deep within her. Just that. It's time for some changes around here. Real changes. Changes that will truly honor Edward's vision, not just exploit it. As they sipped their tea, Clara found herself studying her grandson's face, wondering if he was truly different from his parents, or if the seeds of entitlement were merely dormant, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. For the first time since Edward died, Clara felt a cold clarity replace her grief and loneliness. She wouldn't be making any hasty decisions, but she would be watching and waiting to see who in her family truly deserved the legacy Edward had left, a legacy not just of wealth, but of integrity, passion, and respect for the power of words. I've had enough of your attitude, Mother, Julian said, pacing Clara's grand library like a caged animal, his movements jerky and agitated, a stark contrast to the polished demeanor he usually presented to the world. His face was still flushed with anger, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with fury. First that performance at the luncheon, and now I find you've been poisoning Ethan's mind against us, against the firm itself. Clara sat calmly in Edward's old armchair, its rich leather worn smooth with time, her hands folded serenely in her lap. Ethan stood by the towering bookshelves, arms crossed, watching his father with a mixture of disappointment and unwavering resolve. The tension in the room was a palpable force, thick and suffocating, threatening to erupt like a volatile literary debate. No one is poisoning anyone's mind, Julian, Clara replied evenly, her voice steady and clear, cutting through his bluster. We're simply acknowledging what's been happening in this family since your father died, and what's been happening with the firm's finances, and its soul. And what exactly is that, Mother? Julian demanded, stopping abruptly in front of her, his eyes narrowed, his voice laced with a dangerous edge. You and Serena have been treating Grandma like an endless source of funds, not a person, not the co-founder of this publishing house. Ethan interjected before Clara could answer, his voice calm but firm, his gaze unwavering. The engraved name tag at the gala, announcing Olivia's London agency acquisition as funded without Grandma's explicit agreement, and talking about taking over her entire personal fortune, her ownership shares, and even converting this manor into a corporate retreat, all in the name of streamlining the firm. Julian's face flushed a darker shade of crimson, his jaw tightening, a muscle twitching in his cheek. You've been spying on us, Ethan. This is a gross invasion of privacy. You're a traitor to your own family, to your own future at Beaumont and Sons, he hissed, his accusation laced with fury. I've been paying attention, Father, Ethan countered, meeting his father's furious gaze without flinching. Something you might try sometime, especially when it concerns Grandma's well-being and the true integrity of Edward's legacy, which is about the power of words, not just the power of money. Julian turned back to Clara, his expression shifting abruptly to the conciliatory, almost pleading tone he always used when he wanted something, a desperate attempt to regain control. It was a familiar tactic, one designed to disarm and manipulate. Mother, you're misunderstanding everything. We're just trying to ensure the firm's long-term stability, its global presence. You're not getting any younger, and managing such vast assets can be burdensome. We're thinking of you, of your comfort. I'm 78, Julian, not 98, Clara interrupted, her voice sharp, a hint of steel entering her tone. My mind is perfectly sharp, and I'm more than capable of managing my own affairs and Edward's legacy without your guidance or streamlining. And I am quite capable of thinking for myself and for the true mission of this firm. But Father left you so much. It's all tied to the firm. Julian insisted, his voice rising in frustration, gesturing wildly around the room. It's for the family's collective prosperity. Stop. Clara held up her hand. A gesture of quiet authority that momentarily silenced him. A gesture Edward himself had often used. Edward left me exactly what he intended to leave me. And his estate, and my personal assets, are not a blank check for your ambitions or the firm's unexpected expenses. They are a trust, a responsibility, and a legacy of literary integrity. Julian's false smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Then cold, calculated anger. So what are you saying, Mother? You're cutting us off? Because Serena made one stupid joke with an engraved name tag? Because we're trying to secure the firm's future? To make it truly global? I'm saying that from now on, I'll be making my own decisions about my money and my involvement with the firm, Clara replied, her voice unwavering, her gaze fixed on him. If Olivia's London agency is truly vital, it will find funding through proper, transparent channels, not through unilateral announcements and implied commitments. And if you and Serena want to expand Beaumont and Sons, you will find the means through diligent, ethical business practices, not by attempting to seize control of my personal fortune or my ownership shares. And if I choose to invest in Ethan's future, in his passion for literary scholarship and the preservation of classic texts, that is my prerogative, a true investment in the firm's soul. Julian stared at her, as if she'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language, a language he couldn't comprehend. He seemed genuinely unable to grasp her newfound resolve, her absolute refusal to be manipulated. Then, he turned to Ethan, his eyes blazing with a dangerous fury. I want to speak to my mother alone, Ethan. This is a private family matter, a business matter of the utmost importance. I'm staying, Ethan said firmly, stepping slightly forward, placing himself subtly between Clara and Julian. This is a family matter. And I am family. And this concerns the firm's future, which is my future too, and the legacy of my grandfather. Exactly, Clara added, nodding at Ethan. And Ethan is family. And he will bear witness to this conversation, to the truth, to the unfolding of this story. Something shifted in Julian's expression, a flicker of calculation, a desperate reassessment. He'd always been able to manipulate Clara when they were alone, playing on her emotions, her grief for Edward, her desire to keep the peace and protect the firm's image. But with Ethan present, those tactics wouldn't work. Ethan's presence was a shield, a silent, unwavering witness that stripped Julian of his usual leverage, exposing his true intentions for all to see. Fine, Julian snapped, his voice tight with barely contained rage, his face contorted. But this isn't over, Mother. Not by a long shot. You'll regret this. You'll see what happens when you cross me. When you cross the future of Beaumont and Sons. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the quiet manor, a final, jarring punctuation mark to their strained relationship. After he left, Ethan let out a long breath, the tension visibly draining from his shoulders. I'm sorry, Grandma, he said, his voice laced with regret, stepping closer to her. For what, sweetheart? Clara asked, her heart swelling with affection for him. You've done nothing wrong. You stood by me. You showed true courage, a true understanding of integrity, for not standing up sooner. For letting them treat you this way. for letting them disrespect Grandpère Edward's true legacy. His love for literature and authors. Clara rose and hugged him tightly, a profound sense of gratitude washing over her. "You're standing up now," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That's what matters. Your grandfather would be so proud of you, Ethan. You are the true inheritor of his spirit." After Ethan left, Clara sat in the quiet of her home, the silence no longer oppressive but contemplative, almost peaceful. She thought about Edward, about the codicil to his will, about the family they'd raised together. Had they gone wrong somewhere with Julian? Or had he always had this streak of entitlement, this hunger for control and prestige, that they'd failed to see, blinded by parental love and the demands of building a publishing empire? More importantly, what was she going to do now? The confrontation had been difficult, painful even, but it was just the beginning. The true battle for Edward's legacy, for the soul of Beaumont and Sons, had just begun. The answer came slowly, taking shape in her mind like a complex narrative developing on the page. Instead of confronting Julian and Serena directly with the codicil, which would only make them change their behavior out of fear rather than genuine respect for her or Edward's vision, she would simply let them continue showing their true colors. She would observe. She would document. And she would quietly reclaim her life and her independence, not just from their financial demands, but from their emotional manipulation. She would not be a victim. She would be the author of her own future, and the true guardian of Edward's legacy, ensuring that the firm remained a place of passion for literature and integrity, not just profit. The next morning, Clara called Mr. Thorne. "Clara," he answered warmly, his voice carrying a hint of concern. "I've been hoping to hear from you after the luncheon. I heard certain things about the firm's future." "Yes, that's partly why I'm calling, Mr. Thorne," Clara explained, recounting what had happened at the luncheon and Julian's angry visit afterward, omitting no detail. "I need to understand exactly what Edward left in his will, Mr. Thorne. Not just the codicil, but everything. The full scope of his personal assets, the firm's endowment, his shares, every detail. I need to understand the full narrative of his foresight." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "This is a serious conversation, Clara. A pivotal chapter. Perhaps this would be better discussed in person. Could you come to my office this afternoon? I'll clear my entire schedule. We have much to discuss about Edward's profound wisdom." 3 hours later, Clara sat across from Mr. Thorne in his well-appointed office, the walls lined with ancient legal tomes and framed first editions. As he meticulously explained the full extent of Edward's estate, both personal and tied to the firm, the numbers took her breath away. It was far more substantial than she had ever imagined, a testament to Edward's quiet brilliance, his shrewd business sense, and his profound foresight. Edward built his empire not just on books, Clara, but on a deep understanding of value, of integrity, of legacy, Mr. Thorne explained, his voice calm and professional, his gaze steady. His investments were extremely conservative, which means they weathered every economic downturn beautifully, and the firm itself, its value has appreciated exponentially under his careful stewardship. He truly understood the long game, the enduring power of a well-told story. "I knew we were comfortable," Clara said faintly, her mind reeling, but the sheer scale of it, the true depth of his vision. "Edward was a private man when it came to wealth," Mr. Thorne continued. "He didn't believe in ostentatious displays. He always said you married him when he had nothing but potential and a small, struggling independent bookstore, so he never wanted you to become one of those women who only care about social standing and the price tags of their possessions. He wanted you to be free, Clara, to continue his work with passion, not obligation, to champion the true spirit of literature." Clara laughed softly, a genuine, unburdened laugh, hearing Edward's voice in those words, a comforting echo from the past, a validation of her own spirit. "That sounds exactly like him. He understood me, truly. He understood the soul of a book. As for the codicil," Mr. Thorne continued, his expression turning serious again, "it's straightforward but incredibly powerful. Any direct descendant who publicly humiliates Clara Beaumont, or attempts to control her finances against her wishes, or tries to force her from Beaumont Manor, or attempts to seize control of Beaumont and Sons Publishing without her explicit, written consent, would forfeit their entire inheritance. The engraved name tag incident at the gala would certainly qualify. And the luncheon, the public announcement of the London agency, the attempt to declare you incompetent and seize control of your assets and ownership shares, that too, most likely, falls under its provisions. He paused, looking at her kindly, a profound respect in his eyes. But Clara, you don't have to make any decisions right now. The codicil remains in effect for your lifetime. It's a protection, a safeguard Edward put in place specifically for you, for the firm's true spirit. Clara nodded, her gaze distant, already formulating a new, intricate plan, a strategy as carefully crafted as a classic novel. What if I wanted to make some changes of my own, Mr. Thorne? To my will? To how my personal assets are managed, and how they interact with the firm's future, its true literary legacy. Mr. Thorne leaned forward, a flicker of keen interest in his eyes, a knowing smile playing on his lips. What exactly did you have in mind, Clara? Edward always admired your strategic mind, your quiet strength. He knew you would know how to write the next chapter. By the time Clara left Mr. Thorne's office, she had a comprehensive plan. No dramatic confrontations, no ultimatums, not yet. Just a quiet, methodical reclaiming of her life and her power, and a subtle, powerful redirection of Edward's true legacy. First, she called her old friend, Evelyn Hayes, a renowned literary critic and university professor whom she hadn't seen much since Edward's death, but who shared her deep passion for classic literature. They arranged to meet for lunch the following day. Then Clara stopped by the local university and picked up a brochure for their advanced courses in rare book preservation. Edward had always encouraged her interest in the physical history of books. Perhaps it was time to delve deeper, to truly embrace the tangible future of literature. At home, she sat at Edward's antique writing desk and began researching grants for independent literary journals. Ethan had mentioned wanting to establish a small, independent academic press dedicated to publishing overlooked literary works and critical essays, but was worried about the startup costs and securing initial funding. A genuine investment in her grandson's passion, one built on his expertise and dedication to the integrity of words, seemed like a perfect, meaningful use of some of her resources, a true embodiment of Edward's vision for the firm's future. When her phone rang and she saw it was Serena, Clara let it go to voicemail. The old Clara would have answered immediately, anxious about what emergency or demand might be coming, what new firm crisis required her immediate financial intervention. But that Clara was fading away, replaced by a woman who was finally recognizing her own worth, her own agency, her own profound connection to the world of books. The voicemail, when she listened to it later, was exactly what she expected. Clara, it's Serena. Julian told me about your conversation last night. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We've always had your best interests at heart, and the firm's. Julian and I were thinking we should have dinner this weekend to clear the air. Oh, and Olivia mentioned you'd reconsidered about the London agency funding. The acquisition is imminent, and we really need to finalize the budget. Call me back, Mother. Clara deleted the message without returning the call. Instead, she opened her personal ledger and meticulously recorded a substantial, but carefully considered, personal donation to a small, independent literary festival that focused on promoting emerging authors and fostering a love of reading in underserved communities, a cause far removed from Julian and Serena's grand self-serving projects for prestige. She enclosed a note, expressing her genuine admiration for their work, and sealed the envelope. Her silent strategy had begun. No confrontations, no drama, just quiet, firm boundaries, and a redirection of her resources to where they truly belonged, to the heart of literature and the people who honored it. Edward, she knew, would have approved. 6 months passed in a blur of quiet but significant changes for Clara. Her advanced courses in rare book preservation at the local university became a cherished pursuit, a place where her mind found renewed vigor in understanding the intricate history and delicate care of ancient texts. She reconnected with old friends, Evelyn Hayes among them, sharing laughter and insights over weekly lunches at charming literary cafes, far from the firm's glittering, superficial events. Most importantly, she spent more time with Ethan, who visited regularly, his quiet presence a balm to her soul, his deep understanding of classic literature a mirror of Edward's own. She had provided him with a substantial grant for his independent academic press, the Veritas Press, and his publishing projects were coming along beautifully, filled with innovative ideas for bringing overlooked literary works and critical essays to a wider audience. A true investment in the enduring power of words, not just their commercial value. Meanwhile, Julian and Serena's attitude toward Clara oscillated wildly between chilly distance and desperate, often transparent, attempts to re-establish their access to her finances and influence over the firm. When the silent treatment failed to yield the desired results, they would suddenly appear at Beaumont Manor, unannounced, with forced smiles and thinly veiled excuses for their visits. Each time, the conversation would inevitably steer toward money. A new, ambitious expansion for the firm they were planning, Olivia's desire to acquire a more prominent residence in London with Leo to manage the agency, their own concerns about maintaining their lavish lifestyle, the ever-rising costs of securing Edward's legacy and global presence. Each time, Clara politely, but firmly, declined to engage. "I am making my own financial decisions now, and directing my resources where I see fit, for the true future of literature," became her mantra, delivered with a calm smile that grew more confident and unwavering with each repetition. They didn't take the rejection well. Serena's texts became increasingly hostile, laced with thinly veiled accusations of selfishness, disloyalty to Edward's memory, and ingratitude. Julian's calls grew more demanding, his voice often tinged with a desperate, barely contained frustration, sometimes even outright anger, accusing her of undermining his authority and the firm's progress. But Clara had found a new, quiet strength in her silence, in the firm, unyielding boundaries she was finally enforcing. The sense of liberation, of reclaiming her own agency, her own profound connection to the world of books and Edward's true vision, was intoxicating. She was no longer a puppet on their strings, but a woman in full command of her life and her resources. Today was her birthday, her 79th, and despite her protests, Ethan had insisted on organizing a small, intimate family gathering at Beaumont Manor. "It's time they remember whose house this is, Grandma," he'd said with a grim determination that reminded Clara so much of Edward, and whose values truly govern this legacy of words. Clara spent the morning in Edward's private study, meticulously cataloging a collection of rare manuscripts and drawing profound peace from the simple, repetitive task. The study, once her sanctuary, had been another casualty of the past 5 years. She'd neglected it while catering to Julian and Serena's incessant demands and the firm's endless needs for expansion. Now it was coming back to life, vibrant and flourishing, a mirror of Clara herself, deeply rooted in the enduring power of literature. By mid-afternoon, her home was ready for guests, every room meticulously prepared, a quiet testament to her renewed focus on her own life and the authentic spirit of the manor. Ethan arrived early to help with the final preparations. He moved with a quiet efficiency, arranging an assortment of literary-themed pastries, artisan coffees, and fine teas on a large platter, alongside copies of Edward's beloved first editions. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Grandma?" he asked, his brow furrowed with a hint of concern, as he placed the platter on the antique writing desk. "As ready as I'll ever be, sweetheart," Clara replied, smoothing the fabric of her new dress. A bold, vibrant emerald green she would never have chosen before, but which Evelyn had insisted would bring out the sparkle in her eyes. She'd even applied subtle makeup with techniques learned from a class at the local community center, a small act of self-care that felt profoundly significant. Besides, it's just dinner. A family gathering, but they both knew it was more than that. This was the first time in months that the entire family would be together under her roof. Julian and Serena, Olivia and Leo, and even a few of Edward's oldest, most trusted friends, including Mr. Thorne, whom Clara had specifically invited. The doorbell chimed precisely at 5 o'clock. A clear, resonant sound. Julian and Serena stood on the porch. Their smiles so artificial Clara could almost hear the plastic stretching, a thin veneer over their underlying tension. "Happy birthday, Mother," Julian said, handing her a bouquet of store-bought roses that looked suspiciously like the ones from the local supermarket, already wilting slightly. "Clara, you look remarkably well-preserved," Serena added, her eyes taking in Clara's new dress, her elegantly styled hair, the subtle makeup. Her tone suggested not admiration, but a vague unease, as if Clara had somehow deviated from her assigned role, from the image of the grieving, pliable widow they had grown accustomed to. "Thank you," Clara said simply, stepping back to let them enter, her posture erect, her gaze steady. Olivia and Leo arrived moments later, followed by Mr. Thorne and another couple who had been close friends with Edward and Clara for decades, their faces radiating genuine warmth and concern. Clara moved through the greetings and small talk with a composure she would have found impossible 6 months ago. She felt a quiet, unwavering strength emanating from within, a shield against their veiled criticisms and unspoken expectations. As they settled in the grand dining room, the scent of roasted duck and aged paper filling the air, Clara couldn't help but notice Julian's gaze moving around the manor, assessing, calculating, as if appraising a property for sale or a new corporate acquisition. Serena's eyes kept returning to the new, intricately bound collection of rare books on the antique credenza, a collection Clara had personally curated and restored through her preservation courses. Its vibrant covers a testament to her newfound passion. "Did you redecorate, Clara?" Serena asked, her tone suggesting she found the changes disturbing, perhaps even a little extravagant, certainly unexpected. "Just a few updates," Clara replied, her voice light, almost dismissive. "I've been taking advanced courses in rare book preservation and curating some of Edward's lesser-known works." "Rare book preservation? Curating?" Julian echoed, his voice laced with disbelief, as if Clara had said she was learning to fly to the moon. "At your age, Mother? And with the firm's future at stake, you're wasting time on dusty old books?" "Grandma's really talented, Father," Ethan said proudly, his chest puffing out slightly, a protective glint in his eyes. "Her research on overlooked literary works is invaluable, and she's already secured grants for the Veritas presses to publish them." "Publish?" Serena looked genuinely confused, her brow furrowed in a mixture of surprise and disapproval. "But why would you need to publish, Clara? Surely, you don't need the money. It's unbecoming for the firm's image." Clara smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes, a quiet triumph in its depths. "It's not about need, Serena. It's about joy and purpose, and the satisfaction of contributing to something meaningful with my own hands, something that truly honors the integrity of words and Edward's vision, not just the bottom line." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, thick and palpable, broken only by Leo, who, perhaps sensing the escalating tension, quickly asked Ethan about his independent academic press. "It's coming along great," Ethan said, his enthusiasm infectious, seizing the opportunity to shift the conversation. "Thanks to Grandma, I've secured the initial funding for the Veritas Press, and I'm already working on my first major project, a critical edition of a forgotten Victorian novelist that could redefine the genre." Julian's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing, a dangerous glint in them. "Thanks to Grandma? What does that mean, Ethan? What funding are you talking about?" "All firm resources are allocated through me." Ethan met his father's gaze steadily, his voice calm but firm. "Grandma's investing in my press. A significant investment, actually. She believes in my vision for literary scholarship, for the enduring power of classic texts, not just commercial bestsellers." "Investing?" Julian's voice rose, a dangerous edge to it, barely contained. "With what money, Mother? Your personal assets are tied to the firm's endowment, And your shares are for the family's collective benefit. My money, Julian, Clara said quietly, her gaze fixed on him, unwavering. My personal assets are precisely that. Personal. And I am making my own decisions about them now. And my shares, as Edward stipulated, are entirely at my discretion. But, Mother, Julian began, then caught himself, glancing nervously at the other guests, who were now watching the exchange with thinly veiled interest, some with outright fascination. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Mother. This is hardly the forum for the family matters. There's nothing to discuss, Julian, Clara replied, her voice firm and unwavering. I'm making my own financial decisions now, and I choose to support Ethan's passion for literary integrity, a passion that truly embodies Edward's spirit, far more than any grand, empty gestures of global presence. Julian's face darkened, a vein throbbing in his temple. He looked like he wanted to say more, to launch into a furious tirade. But Olivia, perhaps sensing the escalating tension, quickly interrupted with a story about her and Leo's recent visit to a small, independent bookstore in Paris that specialized in forgotten authors, a subtle shift from the firm's usual focus on grand, established institutions. The conversation shifted, the tension temporarily diffused, but the undercurrent of resentment and shock remained, thick and palpable beneath the surface. After dinner, as they moved to the grand salon for coffee and dessert, Serena cornered Clara in the kitchen, her voice a harsh whisper, tight with suppressed anger. Clara, what on earth is going on with you? First, you refuse to fund Olivia's vital London agency, then we hear nothing from you for months, and now you're throwing money at his obscure projects. They're not obscure projects, Serena, Clara replied calmly, picking up the elegant cake knife. They're crucial contributions to literary scholarship and the preservation of our cultural heritage. Don't be naive, Clara. Academic presses are a financial black hole. He's using you. He's manipulating you for your money, just like he's manipulating Ethan. Serena hissed, her eyes narrowed, a predatory glint in them. No, Serena, Clara said, meeting her gaze directly, her voice firm. I'm supporting my grandson's ambition, his genuine talent, and his dedication to Edward's true passion for literature. There's a profound difference between support and manipulation. And Ethan is a brilliant, honest young man, dedicated to the true art of words. Serena's eyes narrowed further, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Julian and I have been talking, Clara. Seriously talking. We think it's time you consider a more manageable living situation. This manor is simply too large for one person. The new luxury residences at the Scholars' Retreat offer excellent amenities and round-the-clock care, should you need it. And the money from selling this manor, and Edward's first editions, could be reinvested directly into the firm's main trust, securing Edward's legacy for generations, truly making Beaumont and Sons a global powerhouse. So there it was. The plan Ethan had overheard, now brought into the open, brazen and undisguised. They wanted her home. They wanted her entire fortune, her direct ownership of the firm, Edward's precious collection, not just her generosity. They wanted to erase her. This manor isn't for sale, Serena, Clara said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument, a cold, hard edge to it. And my living arrangements, and my personal assets, and my shares in Beaumont and Sons, and Edward's private collection, are not up for family discussion or your reinvestment plans. They are mine, as Edward intended. Before Serena could respond, Julian appeared in the doorway, his expression grim, his eyes scanning the kitchen. Everything okay in here, ladies? Just wonderful, Julian, Clara said, picking up the beautifully decorated cake she'd baked that morning, a small, defiant smile playing on her lips. Shall we have dessert in the salon? Julian cleared his throat, a nervous sound, as Clara began cutting the cake. Before we move on, Mother, there's something Serena and I want to discuss with everyone. Something vital for the firm's future. Clara's hand stilled on the cake knife. This wasn't part of the evening she had planned. This was their desperate, final maneuver, their public attempt to seize complete control. We've been increasingly concerned about Mother's decision-making lately, Julian announced to the room, his voice carefully modulated, designed to sound reasonable, concerned, almost sorrowful. She's been making unwise financial choices, isolating herself, and refusing sound family guidance regarding the firm's future, its global standing, its very prosperity. A stunned silence fell over the room, the only sound the soft clinking of teacups and the faint strains of the string quartet from the distant ballroom. We think it's time to consider a formal power of attorney arrangement, he continued, his gaze sweeping the faces of the assembled guests, a calculated performance for her own protection and for the long-term stability of Edward's legacy, of Beaumont and Sons itself. Mr. Thorne, who had been quietly sipping his tea, set down his cup with deliberate, almost theatrical care, the sound echoing in the sudden hush. That's a serious step, Julian. Do you have concrete evidence of diminished capacity? She's diverting significant funds to an obscure research press in the face of global market expansion. Julian replied, as if that explained everything, as if it were irrefutable proof of Clara's incompetence. And she's refusing to consider sensible options for her personal assets and her direct ownership shares, and even Father's private collection, options that would greatly benefit the firm's collective future. Clara felt a strange, chilling calm settle over her. This moment had been inevitable from the day she'd started saying no. This was the culmination of their entitlement, their greed, their desperate need for control. This was their public declaration of war, their attempt to rewrite her story and erase her from the narrative. Your mother seems perfectly competent to me, Julian, Mr. Thorne observed, his voice quiet but firm, his gaze steady on Julian. A silent challenge. Making decisions you disagree with is not evidence of incapacity. And directing personal funds to a cause she believes in, especially one related to literary scholarship and the preservation of classic texts, seems entirely within her rights and her late husband's true spirit. You don't understand, Mr. Thorne, Julian insisted, his voice rising, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. She's always relied on Edward, and then on me, for financial guidance, for the firm's direction. Now suddenly she's making these irrational choices, undermining everything we've built, everything Edward worked for. Enough. Clara set down the cake knife, the small clatter echoing in the hushed room. She stood, her posture erect, her gaze sweeping over Julian and Serena, then to the other guests, her voice clear and strong, resonating with the quiet power of a well-told truth. I am not irrational, incapacitated, or in need of your guidance, Julian. Or yours, Serena. Mother, be reasonable, Julian pleaded, a desperate edge to his voice, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and fear. I've been reasonable for 5 years, Julian, Clara interrupted, her voice gaining strength, resonating with a newfound authority that filled the room. I've contributed millions to the firm. I've supported your projects. I've allowed you to treat me like a bottomless well rather than your mother, or Edward's true partner in building this legacy, this very publishing house. But that stops now. All of it. Julian's face flushed a dark, mottled red, his eyes blazing with fury. Is this what you want, Mother? He demanded, gesturing around the table, his voice thick with accusation. To humiliate us in front of everyone? To make us look like villains? To destroy Edward's legacy? The very future of Beaumont and Sons? No, Julian, Clara said quietly, her voice devoid of anger. Only a profound sadness. A deep disappointment that cut deeper than any anger. You've managed that all on your own. You have damaged Edward's legacy far more than any public statement I could make, by valuing profit over passion, prestige over integrity, and commercialism over true literature. You selfish old woman, he hissed, standing up so abruptly his chair nearly toppled, his hands clenched into fists, trembling with rage. After everything we've done for you, after all the sacrifices we've made for the firm, Julian. Serena tugged frantically at his arm, suddenly aware of how this looked to the others, of the irreparable damage he was inflicting on their public image, on the firm's reputation. But Julian was beyond caring, consumed by his own fury and sense of betrayal. "You think you can just cut us off? You think you can just undermine everything? Father would be ashamed of you, Mother. He'd be furious. He'd never let you do this." It was at that precise moment that Mr. Thorne cleared his throat, a small, polite sound that somehow cut through Julian's rage, and spoke the words that would change everything, irrevocably, like the final, unexpected twist in a compelling novel. "Actually, Julian," he said, his voice calm and deliberate, his gaze unwavering as he met Julian's furious eyes, "your father anticipated this exact situation, and he made very specific, legally binding provisions for it. Provisions that protect Clara and the true spirit of Beaumont and Sons." The silence that followed Mr. Thorne's words was absolute, heavy with unspoken shock. Julian stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, his furious expression slowly dissolving into one of disbelief, then dawning terror. Serena, beside him, seemed to shrink, her usual poised demeanor crumbling, her carefully constructed facade shattering into 1,000 pieces. Mr. Thorne, ever the professional, reached into his inner jacket pocket and removed a familiar thick envelope, the codicil. Edward added a codicil to his will shortly before he passed. Mr. Thorne explained to the stunned room, his voice calm and deliberate, cutting through the thick tension like a sharp literary critique. He was profoundly concerned about how Clara might be treated after he was gone, and how his true legacy, the very soul of Beaumont and Sons Publishing, might be managed by those who valued profit over passion for words. "What kind of codicil?" Serena demanded, finding her voice first, though it was thin and reedy, a desperate gasp, a sound of pure panic. Mr. Thorne looked to Clara, silently asking for permission. Clara met his gaze and nodded, a quiet, unwavering strength radiating from her, a profound sense of peace settling over her features. "The codicil states that any direct descendant who publicly humiliates Clara Beaumont," Mr. Thorne continued, his voice steady and clear, addressing the entire room, "or attempts to control her finances against her wishes, or tries to force her from Beaumont Manor, or attempts to seize control of Beaumont and Sons Publishing or Edward's private collection without her explicit, written consent, would forfeit their entire inheritance." He paused, his gaze sweeping over Julian and Serena. "This includes, but is not limited to, using her personal assets as an unspoken endowment for the firm without her explicit consent, questioning her mental capacity, or undermining her authority as the rightful matriarch and co-founder." "That's ridiculous," Julian sputtered, finally finding his voice, though it was laced with a desperate, disbelieving laugh, a sound bordering on a sob. "Father would never. He wouldn't do this to his own son, to his own firm, to his family." "He did," Mr. Thorne interrupted, his tone firm, leaving no room for argument, his gaze unwavering. "And as executive of his estate, I've been meticulously documenting the incidents over the past several months, including the engraved name tag at the gala, the luncheon announcement of the London agency, and tonight's audacious attempt to establish a power of attorney and seize control of her shares and the manor. Your actions, Julian, and Serena's, have been thoroughly recorded and witnessed, and constitute a clear breach of the codicil's terms." He turned to Clara, his expression softening slightly, a hint of profound respect in his eyes. "Clara, I have to ask, for the record, do you want to enforce the codicil?" All eyes in the room turned to Clara. She looked at Julian and Serena, their faces now pale with shock and dawning horror, their carefully constructed lives and ambitions crumbling before their eyes. She looked at Olivia, who seemed utterly confused and deeply embarrassed, her gaze darting frantically between her parents and her grandmother, a silent plea for understanding, for a way out. Then, Clara looked at Ethan, whose expression held nothing but quiet support, a silent affirmation of her strength, a profound sense of pride and unwavering loyalty. "Yes," Clara said finally, her voice clear and unwavering, resonating with a newfound authority that filled the room, the quiet power of a well-told truth. I do. I want to enforce the codicil, to protect Edward's true legacy. Julian collapsed back into his chair, a soundless thud, as if all the air had been knocked out of him, his body limp with shock. You can't be serious, Mother, he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible, filled with raw disbelief. I've never been more serious, Julian, Clara replied, her gaze fixed on him, a steely resolve in her eyes. The engraved name tag at the gala, the unilateral announcement of Olivia's agency at the luncheon, the constant demands for money, cloaked in the guise of Edward's legacy. And now, this audacious attempt to declare me incompetent, to force me from my home, to seize control of my entire fortune and my shares in the firm, and Edward's precious collection, all of it stops today. All of it ends here. The true story of your intentions has been revealed. But our inheritance? The firm? Serena whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Her voice a fragile thread, barely a breath. Is forfeit, Mr. Thorne confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion, a pronouncement of immutable fate. All of it. Your shares, your positions, your financial claims to Edward's estate and Beaumont and Sons. All of it? Olivia asked, her voice small, tears welling in her eyes, her youthful idealism shattered, replaced by a crushing reality. Mr. Thorne nodded. I'm afraid so, Olivia. The codicil is quite clear and legally ironclad. Edward foresaw this possibility with remarkable precision. This isn't fair, Julian suddenly shouted, slamming his fist on the table, making the cutlery jump and the crystal glasses clink. A desperate, futile act of defiance. She tricked us. She let us believe the money was just sitting there, waiting to be used for the firm, for us. She let us build our plans. No, Julian, Clara said quietly, her voice calm, a profound sadness in her eyes. A deep disappointment that cut deeper than any anger. I never promised you anything. You assumed. You took. You demanded. But you never once asked what I needed or wanted. You never once considered my well-being, only your own ambitions and desires for prestige and profit. You valued the commercial success more than the literary integrity, the bottom line over the true power of words. What about Olivia and Leo? Serena asked desperately, turning to Mr. Thorne. A last-ditch effort to salvage something, anyone. They haven't done anything wrong. Olivia works tirelessly for the firm. Mr. Thorne consulted his notes. Olivia was present at several incidents, including the gala and the luncheon, but didn't actively participate in the humiliation. However, she also never spoke up to defend Clara, or to question her parents' actions, even when they were clearly inappropriate and disrespectful to her grandmother. Olivia's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at Clara, her face etched with regret, shame, and a dawning, painful understanding. I'm so sorry, Grandma, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I should have said something at the gala about the name tag. I should have stood up for you. I was so caught up in my own career dreams. Clara reached across the table and took her granddaughter's hand, a gesture of quiet forgiveness, a silent promise of a path forward. We all make mistakes, ma chérie. The true measure is what we learn from them, and how we choose to move forward. Your dreams can still flourish, but with integrity, with a true love for literature. So what happens now? Leo asked, putting his arm around Olivia, offering her comfort, his own face a mixture of shock and concern for their future. Now, Mr. Thorne said, according to the terms of the codicil, Julian and Serena's share of Edward's estate, including their significant portion of the firm's endowment and their direct ownership shares, is redistributed. To whom? Julian demanded, his voice sharp, a desperate, fading echo of his former authority. Half goes to Clara outright, Mr. Thorne explained, giving her complete, undisputed control over a substantial portion of Edward's personal fortune and the majority ownership of Beaumont and Sons Publishing, including Edward's private collection. The other half is divided among descendants who have shown her proper respect and care, and who have demonstrated a genuine commitment to Edward's true vision for literature, for publishing, and for the firm's authentic spirit, not merely its financial trappings. All eyes turned to Ethan, who looked genuinely surprised, his jaw slack, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then a quiet, profound understanding. "I didn't know," he said quickly, his voice earnest, almost a whisper. "I swear, Grandma, I had no idea about any of this. I just wanted to help you. To help the books." "I know, sweetheart," Clara assured him, her heart filled with profound pride and love. "Your grandfather would be incredibly proud of the man you've become. You embody his true spirit, Ethan. You are the true inheritor of his literary soul, dedicated to the integrity of words." Julian stood up again, his face contorted with anger, a grotesque mask of fury and humiliation, his body trembling uncontrollably. "This is a setup, a conspiracy. I'll contest it in court. You can't do this to me. I am the CEO of Beaumont and Sons." "You're welcome to try, Julian," Mr. Thorne said calmly, his gaze unyielding, his voice resonating with legal authority. "But the codicil is legally binding, meticulously drafted, and we have ample documented evidence of the conditions being met. Your actions, and Serena's, have been thoroughly recorded and witnessed. The narrative is complete." "Clara," Serena began, her voice suddenly honeyed, a desperate, last-ditch attempt at manipulation, her eyes pleading, brimming with false tears. "Surely we can work this out as a family? We never meant. We just wanted the best for the firm. For Edward's legacy." "Save it, Serena." Clara cut in, her voice firm, unwavering, a finality in her tone. "It's too late for that. The time for discussion, for genuine concern, has long passed. The story has been written, and the truth is clear." "So that's it?" Julian demanded, his voice cracking with disbelief and rage, his entire world collapsing around him. "After everything we've done for you, for the firm, you're just cutting us off? You're destroying everything Father built. You're ruining us." "No, Julian," Clara said, standing to face her son directly, her posture regal and unwavering, her eyes holding a lifetime of disappointment and newfound resolve. "After everything I've done for you, I'm finally standing up for myself. I am protecting Edward's true legacy from those who would exploit it. I am ensuring the firm's future, its soul. There's a profound difference. And you, Julian, you are ruining yourselves. You are writing your own tragic ending." The gathering ended shortly after. Olivia and Leo left with awkward apologies and promises to call soon, their faces a mixture of regret, relief, and a dawning, uncertain future, now free to build their own literary dreams. Julian and Serena stormed out without another word, their departure a whirlwind of bitter silence. Their grand ambitions shattered, their greed exposed, their narrative irrevocably altered. Mr. Thorne and the other guests made tactful exits, leaving just Ethan and Clara in the sudden, profound quiet of Beaumont Manor. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Ethan asked, helping her clear the barely touched dessert plates. His voice filled with genuine concern, his eyes reflecting her own weariness and triumph. "I'm better than okay, Ethan," Clara replied, surprised to find it was true. A profound sense of lightness, of freedom, enveloped her. The gilded cage of expectation had finally opened, and her own story could truly begin. "I feel free. Truly free." The manor breathes again, filled with the spirit of true literature. 1 year later, Clara stood in the grand, renovated library of Beaumont Manor, gazing out at the meticulously tended gardens, vibrant green against the azure sky. The air hummed with the quiet rustle of turning pages and the soft murmur of scholarly discussion. The manor felt alive again, infused with a renewed sense of purpose and authentic literary spirit. Below, in the newly established Edward's Legacy Archive, Ethan was overseeing a small group of literary scholars, explaining the intricacies of his latest critical edition. The Veritas Press, funded by Clara's direct investment and now housed within the manor, had quickly gained recognition for its groundbreaking work, securing prestigious grants and partnerships with leading universities. Ethan, now the press's director and a respected literary figure, moved with a quiet confidence, his passion for the integrity of words palpable in every gesture. Clara herself had embraced a new rhythm of life. Her rare book preservation courses had led to practical application, and she now personally oversaw the restoration of Edward's most cherished first editions, her hands finding joy in the delicate work. She hosted intimate, authentic literary salons for discerning readers and emerging writers, sharing stories of Edward's vision and the firm's true spirit. Far removed from the lavish, impersonal events Julian and Serena had orchestrated, she had even started writing her own book, a historical novel, a story she'd carried in her heart for decades, now finally finding its voice. The doorbell at the main entrance chimed, and Olivia stepped into the library, pushing a stroller with her 1-year-old daughter, Clara Rose, named in honor of her great-grandmother. "Grandma," Olivia called, spotting Clara, a genuine, unforced smile lighting up her face. "I didn't know you'd be here today. I brought some new manuscript submissions for Ethan." Just admiring the morning light on Edward's Shakespeare folio, "Ma chérie," Clara said, bending to admire baby Clara Rose, whose tiny hand gripped a colorful, soft book. "Bonjour, little one. You're growing so fast, just like a compelling narrative." Over the past year, Olivia and Clara had slowly, carefully rebuilt their relationship. After the initial shock and devastation of the inheritance revelation, Olivia had made genuine, consistent efforts to connect with Clara independently of her parents. Leo had proven to be a steadying, supportive influence, encouraging Olivia to form her own opinions and values and to pursue her dreams with integrity. Their conversations were no longer about firm profits or social climbing, but about life, about Olivia's new role as a mother, and Clara's newfound pursuits and quiet contentment. Olivia, with Clara's quiet support and a modest, carefully considered loan from a local bank, had opened her own small, charming, independent literary agency in a quiet, artistic quarter of London, focusing on nurturing new voices and overlooked talents. A success, built on passion, not pretense. Julian and Serena were a different story. After several failed, increasingly desperate attempts to contest the codicil, they had quietly moved to a smaller, less prestigious home in a distant, anonymous suburb of New York, where Julian had taken a less influential position in a corporate publishing conglomerate. Their communication with Clara was limited to terse, formal holiday cards and occasional, strained updates through Olivia, always tinged with resentment and self-pity. The silence, Clara realized, was no longer painful, but profoundly peaceful, a quiet testament to her liberated spirit. "Father called last week," Olivia said with a sigh, settling at a small table in the library with the baby, her expression weary. Same conversation as always. Complaints about his new job, the house they had to settle for, how unfair everything is, how they were betrayed by Grandpère Edward's will. "I'm sorry, dear," Clara said, though she felt no real sorrow for Julian and Serena. Their choices had led them to this path. "Don't be, Grandma," Olivia said firmly, meeting Clara's gaze, a newfound maturity and resolve in her eyes. "They wrote their own ending. I've written mine, and I'm choosing to build something real, something authentic. Here with you and Ethan, something that truly honors Grandpère Edward's spirit and the power of words." Ethan emerged from the archive, wiping his hands on a cloth, his face lighting up when he saw them. "Perfect timing," he said, joining them in the library. "I wanted to run something by you both." He explained his idea for expanding the Veritas Press's outreach even further, offering free writing workshops to local communities and establishing a scholarship program for underprivileged students passionate about literary studies. It would mean reinvesting some of the press's profits and seeking new grants, he added, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "But I think it's worth it. It's what Grandpère Edward would have wanted. True patronage of literature." not just its commerce. "I think it's wonderful, Ethan," Clara said, feeling a surge of profound pride that warmed her to the core. This was Edward's legacy. Truly alive, flourishing beyond measure. As they discussed the details, Clara gazed around the sunlit library. This beautiful place, this vibrant life, represented not just Ethan's and Olivia's dreams, but a new, authentic chapter for all of them. In the year since the revelation, Clara had discovered parts of herself that had been dormant for too long. She'd deepened her understanding of literary history, embraced her own writing, even started traveling, simple weekend trips to explore other independent bookstores at first, then 2 weeks exploring literary landmarks in England with a small, curated senior tour group where she'd met Arthur, a charming, witty widower from Oxford who shared her passion for books and history and who now called her every Sunday, their conversations filled with warmth and intellectual curiosity. Edward would have approved, Clara thought, a gentle smile gracing her lips, not just of the Veritas Press, or Ethan's unwavering dedication to true literary scholarship, or Olivia's authentic agency, or her own newfound independence and joy, but of the boundaries she'd finally established, the truth she'd unveiled, and the authentic relationships she'd nurtured. He had tried to protect her with his codicil, but in the end, Clara had learned to protect herself, and in doing so, had truly honored his memory by safeguarding his deepest values: integrity, passion, and a profound respect for the enduring power of words. Olivia's baby, Clara rose, let out a happy gurgle, reaching out a tiny hand towards a beautifully illustrated children's book on a nearby shelf, drawing Clara back to the present. This was her family now. Not perfect, not complete in the traditional sense, perhaps, but real, authentic. They were building something new from the ruins of what had been lost. A legacy of respect, passion, and genuine connection. And it was, in its own way, profoundly beautiful, like a perfectly crafted, timeless novel. "What do you think, Grandma?" Ethan asked, pulling her into the conversation, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm, his vision clear. Clara smiled at her grandson and granddaughter, at the baby who represented their bright, hopeful future, at the thriving press and manor that had grown from trust and respect rather than obligation and greed. "I think," she said, her voice filled with quiet contentment, a deep, abiding peace, "that this is exactly where we're supposed to be. This is Edward's true legacy, flourishing, a story that will stand the test of time."